Don't worry about what you can't control, and get a handle on your anxiety. What if the anxiety you feel right now has nothing to do with your problems, and everything to do with your need to control what has not even happened yet? Pause for a moment and really consider this. How much of your day is spent inside your own head, trying to predict outcomes, avoid discomfort, or rehearse situations that may never even exist? It feels responsible. It feels like you are staying ahead. It feels like you are protecting yourself. But what if that constant effort is not protecting you at all? What if it is quietly exhausting you? There is a pattern happening beneath the surface that most people never notice. The more you try to control every detail of your life, the more unstable your inner state becomes. You begin to depend on certainty to feel calm. You start believing that if you just think a little more, plan a little better, anticipate a little further, then maybe you will finally relax. But that moment never arrives. The mind does not reward control with peace. It rewards it with more demand for control. And without realizing it, you enter a cycle. You think to feel safe. You plan to feel secure. You anticipate to avoid pain. But each of these actions feeds the very thing you are trying to escape. Because anxiety does not come from reality itself. It comes from the constant tension between what is happening now and what you believe must be managed, predicted, or prevented. This is where most people get stuck. They treat anxiety as the problem, when in reality anxiety is often the symptom of a deeper misunderstanding. The misunderstanding that you are supposed to control more than you actually can. And here is where everything begins to shift. You were never meant to control everything. You were meant to understand the difference between what belongs to you and what does not. Between what requires action and what requires acceptance. If you ignore this distinction, your mind will continue to create pressure where none is needed. But if you begin to see it clearly, something changes. You start releasing energy that was trapped in unnecessary battles. You begin to feel space where there was once tension, and what you are about to see next may challenge the way you have been operating for a long time. Because the weight you feel is not random. It has a source. The invisible weight you carry. Every day. There is a kind of exhaustion that no amount of rest seems to fix. You wake up, and before anything even happens, your mind is already working. It starts scanning for problems, revisiting unfinished thoughts, anticipating situations that have not even taken shape yet. It feels automatic, almost like it is part of who you are. But this is not just thinking. This is a constant mental load that never fully turns off. You carry conversations that never happened. You replay moments that are already gone. You build scenarios about the future as if they are already real. And your brain does not distinguish between what is imagined and what is actually happening. To your nervous system, it is all real. So your body reacts. Subtle tension builds in your shoulders. Your breathing becomes shallow without you noticing. Your attention becomes fragmented. And over time, this becomes your baseline. You may not even label it as anxiety. You might call it responsibility. You might say you are just being careful, just being aware, just trying to stay prepared. But there is a critical difference between being prepared for reality and being consumed by possibilities. Preparedness is grounded. It is clear. It leads to action. But this constant mental simulation does not lead to resolution. It leads to more thinking, more anticipation, more internal noise. And here's the part that changes everything. This weight you feel is not created by your life itself. It is created by how much of your life you are trying to mentally control at once. You are holding outcomes that are not yours to decide. You are carrying timelines you cannot predict. You are investing energy into situations that are not even real yet. And the mind keeps doing this because it believes that if it can just stay ahead of everything, you will finally feel safe. But the opposite happens. The more you try to stay ahead, the more your mind refuses to rest. It becomes a loop that feeds itself. Thought creates tension. Tension creates more thought. And the cycle continues without pause. And if you are not aware of this process, it starts to shape everything. Your decisions become heavier. Your focus becomes weaker. Your sense of peace becomes dependent on things that are constantly changing. Because what feels like awareness is often overload. What feels like control is often pressure. And what feels like preparation is often a form of silent fear. And if this weight is always present, even when nothing is actually wrong, then the real question is not what is happening around you. The real question is why your mind refuses to let go of what it was never meant to hold, the false sense of responsibility over everything. There is a belief that quietly shapes the way you think, the way you react, and the way you carry your life. And most of the time you do not even notice it. It is the belief that more depends on you than actually does. It feels like maturity. It feels like awareness. It feels like you are doing the right thing by staying on top of everything. But beneath that surface, there is something heavier forming. You start to feel responsible not only for your actions but for outcomes, for other people's reactions, for situations that are still unfolding. You begin to assume that if something goes wrong, you should have anticipated it. That if someone is disappointed, you should have prevented it. That if the future becomes uncertain, you should have controlled it better. And slowly, without realizing it, you expand your sense of responsibility far beyond what is truly yours. This is where anxiety finds a powerful foothold. Because the more you believe everything depends on you, the more pressure your mind creates to manage everything at once. You are no longer just living your life. You are trying to supervise every possible direction it could take. It becomes exhausting because there is no clear boundary. Where does your responsibility end? Where does reality take over? When do you act, and when do you allow things to unfold? Without clear answers, your mind defaults to one strategy. Control more, think more, anticipate more. But here is the contradiction that most people never confront. The more responsibility you assume beyond your actual influence, the less effective you become in the areas that truly matter. Your focus gets diluted. Your energy gets scattered. You spend time trying to manage things that are not yours to manage, while neglecting what is directly in your control. And there is another layer that makes this even more complex. This false sense of responsibility often feels like care. You tell yourself that you are doing this because you care about outcomes, about people, about getting things right. But care without boundaries turns into burden. Because when you try to carry everything, you eventually feel like everything is heavy. And the mind does not question this pattern easily. It reinforces it. It tells you that if you let go, something will go wrong. That if you stop thinking ahead, you will fall behind. That if you do not stay in control, you will lose stability. So you keep going. You keep carrying. You keep trying to manage what was never fully yours. But at some point, something begins to crack. You notice the fatigue. You feel the constant tension. You realize that no matter how much you try, you can never fully account for everything. And this realization creates discomfort. Because if you are not responsible for everything, then what exactly are you responsible for? That question is uncomfortable, but it is also necessary. Because until you answer it, your mind will continue operating under a false assumption that keeps you trapped in a cycle of pressure and anxiety. And what comes next will challenge another habit that feels helpful, but is quietly working against you. When overthinking feels like productivity, there is a moment where thinking stops being useful and starts becoming noise, but it rarely feels that way while it is happening. In fact, it often feels like you are doing something important. You are analyzing, preparing, considering every angle. It gives you the illusion that you are making progress, that you are getting closer to clarity. But if you look closely, nothing is actually moving forward. You sit with a decision and turn it over again and again in your mind. You revisit the same possibilities, the same risks, the same imagined outcomes. Each time it feels slightly different, as if this next thought might finally unlock the answer. But instead of resolution, what you get is more mental activity. This is where overthinking disguises itself as productivity. Because real productivity leads to action. It creates movement even if it is imperfect. Overthinking does the opposite. It delays action by convincing you that you are not ready yet, that you need more certainty, more clarity, more control before you can move. And the mind becomes trapped in a loop that feels productive but leads nowhere. You tell yourself that you are being thorough, that you are avoiding mistakes, that you are just taking your time to get it right. But beneath that reasoning, there is often something else driving the process. The desire to eliminate uncertainty completely before taking a step. And that is where the problem begins, because certainty is not something you can fully achieve through thinking alone. The more you think, the more variables you discover, the more possibilities appear, the more outcomes you try to account for, the more complex everything becomes. Instead of simplifying the situation, your mind expands it, and with that expansion comes more tension. You start to feel stuck, not because the situation is impossible, but because your mental process is creating friction. You hesitate, you delay, you second-guess even simple choices, and all the while, it feels like you are working on the problem. But nothing is actually being resolved. There is also a hidden cost to this pattern. Every time you rely on overthinking to feel prepared, you reinforce the idea that action without complete certainty is unsafe. You train your mind to depend on analysis instead of trust. And over time, this weakens your ability to move forward naturally. You begin to lose confidence in your instincts. You hesitate even when you know what to do. You wait for a level of clarity that never fully arrives. And the longer you stay in this state, the more overwhelming everything feels. Because the mind was not designed to simulate every possible future before acting. It was designed to respond, adjust, and learn through movement. And when you interrupt that process with constant analysis, you create a gap between intention and action that grows wider over time. At some point, you have to ask yourself a direct question. Is this thinking helping me move forward, or is it keeping me in place? Because once you see the difference, it becomes harder to ignore. And what you are about to notice next goes even deeper, because it is not just about thinking too much. It is about where your thinking is taking you. The trap of anticipating problems that do not exist. There is a subtle habit that feels like intelligence, but quietly fuels anxiety more than almost anything else. It is the habit of living ahead of reality. Your mind does not wait for things to happen. It runs forward, builds scenarios, and then reacts to them as if they are already real. You imagine a conversation going wrong. You picture a plan failing. You anticipate rejection, conflict, disappointment. And even though none of it has happened, your body responds as if it already did. Your chest tightens. Your thoughts accelerate. Your mood shifts. This is not preparation. This is projection. And the more you do it, the more convincing it becomes. Your brain starts treating imagined outcomes as data. It builds emotional reactions based on possibilities, not facts. And over time, you begin to trust these internal simulations as if they are reliable predictions of the future. But they are not. They are biased, incomplete, and often driven by fear rather than reality. Still, the mind insists on continuing this process because it believes it is helping you. It tells you that if you can anticipate what might go wrong, you can avoid it. That if you stay one step ahead, you will remain safe. But here is what actually happens. You experience the stress of the situation without ever being in it. You suffer before anything occurs. You drain energy on events that may never exist. And even if they do, you will have already lived through them multiple times in your head. This creates a constant state of tension. You are never fully present because part of your mind is always somewhere else, dealing with something that has not happened yet. And this distance from the present moment has consequences. You miss clarity. You overlook what is actually in front of you. You react to imagined threats instead of responding to real conditions. Your decisions become shaped by fear of possibility rather than awareness of reality. And the most dangerous part is how normal it feels. You might tell yourself that this is just how you stay prepared, that this is how you avoid being caught off guard. But in truth, you are not avoiding discomfort. You are multiplying it. Because instead of facing one real moment when it arrives, you are creating dozens of artificial ones in advance. And none of them can be resolved, because they are not real. So your mind keeps generating more, trying to find closure in a space where closure does not exist. At some point, this becomes exhausting. You feel overwhelmed, even when nothing concrete is happening. You feel tension without a clear cause, and you start searching for answers in the external world when the pattern is being created internally. This is where awareness becomes critical, because once you recognize that your mind is reacting to imagined futures, you begin to question the validity of those reactions. You start to see the difference between what is happening and what could happen. And that distinction changes everything, because if your anxiety is being fueled by what has not happened, then the real issue is not the future. It is your relationship with it. And what comes next will challenge how you deal with that relationship at its core. The conflict between acceptance and resistance. There is an internal battle happening that most people never clearly identify, but they feel it every day. It is the tension between what is already happening and your refusal to accept it as it is. This tension is subtle, but it shapes your emotional state more than any external event. Something does not go the way you expected. A delay, a rejection, an unexpected change. In that moment, reality presents itself clearly. But instead of meeting it directly, your mind reacts with resistance. It argues, it questions, it tries to rewrite what has already occurred. This is where suffering begins to grow. Because acceptance is often misunderstood. People think accepting something means agreeing with it, approving it, or giving up. But that is not what acceptance is. Acceptance is simply seeing reality without adding friction to it. Resistance, on the other hand, is the attempt to mentally fight what has already taken place. And this fight never leads to resolution. When you resist reality, you create a second layer of experience, the event itself and your reaction against it. The event might be uncomfortable, but your resistance amplifies it. It extends it. It keeps it alive in your mind long after it has already happened. You replay it. You question it. You imagine how it should have gone differently. And in doing so, you trap yourself in a loop where the moment never fully ends. This is why some experiences linger far longer than they should. It is not because of the event itself, but because of the ongoing resistance attached to it. And the mind justifies this resistance. It tells you that if you accept what happened, you are being passive, that you are allowing things to go wrong, that you are losing control. So instead of accepting, you tighten your grip. You think more. You analyze more. You try to mentally fix something that no longer exists in the present moment. And this creates a constant sense of unrest, because reality moves forward, but your mind stays behind, trying to negotiate with something that is already finished. At the same time, there is another layer to this conflict. You are not only resisting what has already happened, you are also resisting the uncertainty of what is coming next. You want clarity before it arrives. You want guarantees before action. You want outcomes to be defined before you step into them. And when that does not happen, resistance appears again. So you end up resisting both the past and the future. One because it did not meet your expectations, and the other because it has not revealed itself yet. And in the middle of this, the present moment becomes almost inaccessible. This is the core of the conflict. You are trying to control what cannot be controlled and resisting what cannot be changed. But here is the shift that changes everything. Acceptance does not remove your ability to act. It removes the unnecessary tension that blocks effective action. When you stop resisting what is, your mind becomes clearer. Your energy becomes available again. You can respond instead of react. And that response is always more precise, more grounded, and more effective than anything driven by resistance. But letting go of resistance is not easy, because it feels like you are losing something. And what you are about to see next will reveal the hidden cost of trying to avoid that feeling. The emotional cost of trying to predict everything. There is a price you pay for trying to stay ahead of everything, and most of the time, you do not realize how much it is costing you until you feel completely drained without a clear reason why. At first, it seems harmless. You think ahead to avoid mistakes. You analyze possibilities to feel prepared. You simulate outcomes to reduce uncertainty. It feels like a strategy, like a way to protect yourself from what might go wrong. But over time, This constant need to predict begins to consume more and more of your mental and emotional energy. Your mind never truly rests because it is always searching for what comes next. You move from one scenario to another, from one possibility to the next, trying to map out a future that has too many variables to ever be fully understood in advance. And with each new possibility, your brain generates a corresponding emotional response. Not to reality, but to imagination. This is where the cost becomes real. You begin to feel stress without a present cause. You experience tension without an immediate threat. Your body reacts to situations that are not happening, and your mind tries to solve problems that do not exist yet. And because these problems are hypothetical, they cannot be resolved. So the cycle continues. You think more to find certainty, but the more you think, the more uncertainty you uncover. Each answer leads to new questions. Each scenario branches into multiple outcomes. And instead of gaining control, you lose clarity. Your emotional state becomes unstable, shifting based on thoughts rather than facts. One moment you feel calm, the next moment a new possibility enters your mind, and everything changes. Your mood drops. Your energy tightens. Your attention narrows. And all of this happens internally, without anything in the external world actually changing. This creates a constant state of alertness. You are always on edge, always preparing, always anticipating. And while it may feel like you are being proactive, your system is actually under continuous strain. There is no recovery, because there is no pause. And this is where exhaustion begins to build. Not physical exhaustion, but mental fatigue that slowly affects everything. Your ability to focus weakens. Your patience shortens. Your decision-making becomes heavier. Even simple choices start to feel overwhelming because your mind is already overloaded. And yet, the habit continues, because it feels necessary. You tell yourself that if you stop thinking ahead, you will be unprepared. That if you stop predicting, you will be vulnerable. That if you relax, something will go wrong. But this belief is what keeps the cycle alive. Because the truth is, no amount of prediction will eliminate uncertainty. And the more you try, the more you sacrifice your present stability for a future that cannot be fully controlled. At some point, you begin to notice that despite all the effort, you do not feel safer. You do not feel more in control. You just feel more tired. And this realization is uncomfortable because it challenges the very strategy you have been relying on. If predicting everything is not giving you peace, then what is it actually giving you? And what you are about to see next will confront the belief that has been quietly supporting this entire pattern. The illusion that more control creates more security. There is a belief that sits at the center of everything you have been doing, thinking, and feeling up to this point. It is the idea that the more control you have, the safer you will feel. It sounds logical. It feels responsible. It gives you a sense of direction. But this belief is deeply misleading, because control does not eliminate uncertainty. It only changes how you relate to it. At first, control feels like stability. You organize, you plan, you anticipate, you prepare. You try to reduce variables, minimize risks, and create a sense of order around you. And for a moment, it works. You feel more grounded, more confident, more in charge. But that feeling does not last. Because the moment something falls outside of your expectations, the sense of security begins to crack. A delay, an unexpected reaction, a change in circumstances. And suddenly all the control you built starts to feel fragile. This is where the illusion reveals itself. If your sense of safety depends on things going according to plan, then your safety is always temporary. It is conditional. It is dependent on factors that are constantly shifting. And the mind reacts to this instability by trying to regain control. You tighten your grip. You think more. You try to account for more possibilities. You increase your effort, believing that more control will fix the problem. But instead of creating stability, you increase sensitivity. Now even small deviations feel significant. Minor uncertainties feel threatening. You become more reactive, not less. And this is the paradox. The more control you seek, the less secure you feel. because you are training your mind to rely on something that cannot be maintained consistently. You are building your sense of safety on external conditions that are unpredictable by nature, and when those conditions inevitably change, your internal state shifts with them. This creates a constant need to adjust, to fix, to re-establish control, and that constant adjustment becomes exhausting. You are no longer at ease. You are managing outcomes, managing perceptions, managing possibilities, always trying to keep things within a range that feels safe. But safety built this way is unstable because it does not come from within. It comes from your ability to control what is outside of you. And the moment that ability is challenged, everything feels uncertain again. At some point, a realization begins to form. Despite all your efforts, control is not giving you the security you expected. It is giving you temporary relief followed by renewed tension. And that realization creates a critical question. If control is not the source of real security, then what is? Because once that question becomes clear, it forces you to look at your approach differently. And what comes next is not just an idea. It is a moment that most people try to avoid, but it changes everything when you face it directly. The moment you realize you cannot control it. There is a moment that arrives without warning, and when it does, it disrupts everything you thought was holding your life together. It is the moment when you realize, not intellectually but emotionally, that you cannot control what is happening. It might come through a situation that does not respond to your effort. You try to fix it, adjust it, anticipate it, but nothing changes. Or it comes through something unexpected that completely bypasses your plans. In that instant, all the strategies you relied on lose their effect. And what you feel is not just frustration, it is exposure. Because control creates the illusion that you are protected, that as long as you are managing things, you are safe. But when control fails, that illusion disappears, and what remains is uncertainty, raw and unfiltered. This is the moment most people resist the most. Your mind reacts immediately. It searches for new angles, new strategies, new ways to regain control. It tells you to try harder, think deeper, push further. It refuses to accept the limitation. But no matter how much effort you apply, there are situations that simply do not respond to control. And this creates a break in your internal system. You feel tension rising because your usual approach is not working. You feel discomfort because there is no immediate solution. You feel the urge to escape the feeling, to regain stability as quickly as possible. But here is what makes this moment so important. For the first time, you are face to face with reality without the filter of control. There is nothing to manage, nothing to predict, nothing to adjust, only what is exactly as it is. And this can feel overwhelming because you are not used to being in that space. Your mind wants to move away from it. It wants to rebuild the sense of control as fast as possible. But if you stay with this moment, something different begins to happen. You start to see clearly. You begin to recognize the limits of your influence. You begin to understand where your effort actually matters and where it does not. You begin to separate what is yours from what never was. This clarity does not come from thinking more. It comes from stopping the attempt to control what cannot be controlled. And in that pause, something shifts. The tension does not disappear immediately, but it changes. It softens. It loses the intensity that came from resistance. Your mind is no longer fighting reality, and that alone creates space. This is the turning point. Because once you truly experience the limits of control, you cannot go back to believing that control is the solution to everything. But this moment also creates a new challenge. If you are not controlling everything, then what are you supposed to do? What replaces that constant effort? What takes the place of anticipation, prediction, and management? Because letting go without direction feels like falling. And what comes next is where that direction begins to form. The question that changes everything. At some point, after all the effort, all the thinking, all the attempts to control what could not be controlled, a different kind of question begins to emerge. It is quieter than the others, but far more powerful. Instead of asking what might go wrong, instead of asking how to prevent every possible outcome, you begin to ask something else. What is actually within my control right now? This question seems simple, almost obvious, but it changes the entire direction of your mind. Because for the first time, your attention shifts away from the future and returns to the present. It moves away from possibilities and focuses on reality. It stops chasing uncertainty and starts identifying what is concrete, immediate, and actionable. And this shift creates clarity. You begin to see that there are things you can influence but not control, things you can act on but not guarantee, and things that are completely outside your reach no matter how much you think about them. Before, all of these were mixed together. Your mind treated everything as if it required your attention. But now, a separation starts to happen, and with that separation comes relief. Because you no longer feel responsible for everything at once. You begin to narrow your focus. You begin to invest your energy where it can actually make a difference. This does not mean problems disappear. It means your relationship with them changes. Instead of trying to solve the entire future, you start addressing what is directly in front of you. Instead of carrying outcomes, you carry actions. Instead of demanding certainty, you work with what is available. And something interesting happens. Your mind becomes quieter, not because there are no more uncertainties, but because you are no longer trying to resolve them all at once. You are no longer feeding the cycle of endless anticipation. You are engaging with reality as it unfolds, rather than trying to get ahead of it. And this builds a different kind of confidence, not the fragile confidence that depends on things going according to plan, but a grounded confidence that comes from knowing you can respond to whatever happens. You trust your ability to act, not your ability to predict. And that trust reduces the need for control, because control is often a substitute for trust. When you do not trust yourself to handle what comes, you try to control what comes. But when you begin to trust your capacity to respond, control becomes less necessary. This is where your energy starts to return. You are no longer spreading it across imagined futures. You are directing it into present action. And that makes everything feel more manageable, more stable, more real. But there is still one step that most people struggle with. Knowing what is in your control is one thing. Letting go of what is not is something else entirely. Because even when you see it clearly, there is a part of you that still wants to hold on. And what comes next will challenge that attachment in a way that most people avoid. The underrated power of letting go. There is a moment where understanding is no longer enough. You already see what is within your control and what is not. But even with that clarity, something inside you resists releasing what you cannot control. Because letting go does not feel natural at first. It feels like you are losing something. It feels like you are becoming passive, like you are giving up your ability to influence what happens next. Your mind questions it immediately. It asks, if I stop holding on, what guarantees do I have? And that question reveals the deeper issue. You are never holding on for control alone. You are holding on for certainty. Letting go challenges that need directly. It removes the illusion that you can secure outcomes through effort alone, and that creates discomfort, because certainty has been your anchor. But here is what most people do not realize. Holding on is not what creates stability. It is what creates tension. Every time you try to control something that is outside your reach, your mind stays engaged with it. It keeps returning to it, analyzing it, trying to adjust it. And because it cannot resolve it, the tension remains active. Letting go is not about losing control. It is about releasing that tension. It is the moment you stop investing energy into something that does not respond to your effort. It is the decision to no longer carry what cannot be changed. And when that happens, something shifts internally. Your mind begins to settle. Not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer trying to resolve what is unresolvable. There is a difference between a problem that requires action and a situation that requires acceptance. And for the first time, you start to feel that difference. Letting go does not make you weak. It makes your focus sharper. Because when you release what is not yours, you create space for what is. Your attention becomes more precise. Your actions become more intentional. Your energy is no longer scattered across multiple uncertainties. It is directed. And that direction creates a sense of calm that control never could. Control depends on outcomes. Letting go depends on understanding. And understanding is stable because it does not change with circumstances. This is why letting go feels uncomfortable at first, but liberating once you experience it. You are not losing your ability to act. You are removing the weight that was interfering with your ability to act clearly, and that clarity changes the way you move forward. But there is still something that needs to be addressed. Even when you let go of what you cannot control, your mind still has energy. It still needs direction. It still needs somewhere to focus. Because if you do not guide that energy intentionally, it will return to old patterns. And what comes next is about where that energy needs to go. Reorganizing your mental energy. Once you begin to let go of what is outside your control, something unexpected happens. You do not just feel relief, you also feel a kind of emptiness. The constant mental activity that once filled your attention starts to quiet down, and now there is space. And most people do not know what to do with that space. Because your mind is used to being occupied. It is used to scanning, predicting, analyzing. It is used to being busy. So when that activity decreases, there is a tendency to fall back into the same patterns, simply to fill the gap. This is where intention becomes essential. If you do not consciously direct your mental energy, it will automatically return to anticipation and control, not because you want it to, but because that is what it has been trained to do. So the question is no longer what you should stop doing. The question becomes where your attention should go instead. This is the moment where you begin to reorganize how your mind operates. Instead of focusing on what might happen, you start focusing on what is happening. Instead of scanning for problems, you engage with what is in front of you. You bring your attention back to your actions, your environment, your immediate reality. And this shift is more powerful than it seems, because your mind can only fully engage with one dimension at a time. It can either be lost in imagined futures or grounded in present experience. It cannot do both with clarity. When you bring your attention to the present, you interrupt the cycle of anticipation. You begin to notice things you were previously missing. Your thoughts slow down, your body relaxes. Your decisions become more direct because they are based on what is real, not what is imagined. And this creates a different kind of stability, not the fragile stability that depends on controlling outcomes, but a grounded stability that comes from being fully engaged with the present moment. This is where your energy becomes efficient. You are no longer wasting it on scenarios that do not exist. You are using it where it has immediate impact, and that makes everything feel more manageable. Even challenges become clearer, because when you face them in real time, without the added weight of anticipation, they are often simpler than your mind made them appear. You respond to what is actually happening, not to layers of imagined complications. And over time, this becomes a new habit. Your mind starts to recognize that it does not need to be everywhere at once, that it does not need to predict everything to function effectively, that it can operate with focus instead of constant expansion. But this requires consistency, because the old pattern does not disappear instantly. There will be moments where your mind tries to return to anticipation, to control, to overthinking. And in those moments, you need a clear way to reestablish direction. You need a practice. Not something complex, but something you can apply repeatedly, something that reinforces the distinction between what is yours to act on and what is not. And that is exactly what comes next. The daily practice of separating control and influence. Understanding the difference between what you control and what you do not is powerful, but understanding alone is not enough to change how your mind operates. Without repetition, your mind will return to old patterns, not because they are effective, but because they are familiar. This is why a daily practice is necessary, not something complicated, not something that requires extra time or effort, but something you apply in real moments as they happen. Because the real challenge is not knowing the difference. The real challenge is remembering it when your mind starts to drift. It begins with a simple pause. Whenever you feel tension rising, whenever your thoughts start accelerating, Whenever you notice yourself trying to predict or control what has not happened yet, you interrupt the pattern. And in that interruption, you ask a direct question. Is this within my control, within my influence, or completely outside both? At first, this may feel mechanical, but over time, it becomes automatic. You begin to see situations more clearly. You recognize when your mind is trying to take on something unnecessary. You catch yourself earlier, before the loop fully develops. And this is where change starts to take hold. If something is within your control, you act. You make a decision, you take a step, you engage with it directly. There is no need for excessive thinking because action provides clarity. If something is within your influence, you contribute without attachment. You do what you can, but you do not try to force the outcome. You allow space for variables you cannot dictate. And if something is outside both, you release it. Not because it does not matter, but because your effort cannot change it. Holding on does not improve it. It only drains you. This is the discipline. Not controlling everything, but consistently redirecting your energy. And the more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. You stop reacting automatically. You start responding intentionally. Your mind becomes more structured, not through force, but through clarity. And something else begins to change as well. Your tolerance for uncertainty increases. Not because uncertainty disappears, but because you are no longer trying to eliminate it. You are learning to function alongside it, without letting it dominate your attention. This creates a quiet kind of confidence. You trust your ability to navigate situations as they come, instead of trying to resolve them before they exist. You rely less on prediction and more on presence. And this reduces the pressure you place on yourself. Because you are no longer responsible for everything. You are responsible for what is yours, and that boundary protects your energy. But there is one final realization that brings all of this together. Because when you stop trying to control everything, something unexpected opens up. And that is where everything changes. When you stop controlling, you start living. There is a point where everything you have been holding begins to loosen. Not because your life suddenly becomes perfect, but because you finally stop trying to force it to be. You stop trying to predict every outcome. You stop trying to manage every possibility. You stop trying to guarantee that nothing will go wrong. And in that space, something unfamiliar appears. Freedom. Not the kind of freedom that comes from having everything under control, but the kind that comes from no longer needing everything to be. For a long time, you believed that control was the path to peace, that if you could just organize your life well enough, think far enough ahead, and eliminate enough uncertainty, you would finally feel stable. But what you discover instead is that peace was never on the other side of control. It was on the other side of letting go. Because when you stop trying to control what you cannot, your mind is no longer stretched across multiple timelines. It is no longer divided between past, present, and future. It returns to where your life is actually happening. Here. And in this space, everything becomes more real. Your actions become clearer because they are not clouded by endless anticipation. Your experiences become deeper because you are fully present in them. Even uncertainty changes its nature. It no longer feels like a threat that must be eliminated. It becomes something you can face, moment by moment. This is where living actually begins. Not in perfect conditions, not in guaranteed outcomes, but in your ability to engage with life as it unfolds, without needing to control every part of it. And something else shifts as well. You begin to trust life differently, not blindly, not passively, but with a grounded understanding that you can handle what comes, that you do not need to solve everything in advance to move forward, that your strength is not in controlling outcomes, but in responding to them. This trust creates a calm that control never could, because control is always temporary. It depends on things staying within your expectations. But this kind of trust is stable. It stays with you, even when things change. And things will change. But now that does not destabilize you in the same way, because you are no longer trying to hold everything together. You are allowing things to move, to shift, to evolve, while you remain grounded in what is actually yours, your actions, your decisions, your presence, And that is enough. In fact, it is more than enough. Because the moment you stop trying to control everything, you stop fighting life. And when you stop fighting life, you finally have the space to live it.